Just try to have a solid, like, Zen attitude. Oh God, my mouse is dying. Failure Friday! Uh, there we go. Welcome to Failure Friday, everybody. I'm basically just going to be talking about, issues that have been solved throughout history, throughout the history of this project and some of the other places I worked. The first issue I wanted to talk about was when I was working at a different company, and I really wish I had visual aids for this, but I don't. But basically, we had an issue where it was working, right? We were able to connect to someone else's listen server. And then after certain change sets, you don't test every time. We didn't have the pipeline set up that we have here, which was awesome. But at that place, we basically just we were looking back through the change sets, the commits. I think it was in Git. We're like, which one is it? And so we're all brute force just trudging through like commit after commit in the history, trying to find the spot where it wasn't broken, where we were still able to connect to someone else's listen server with whatever Photon Oculus Quest uh way of connecting to each other we were using. It was complicated, but either way, so we're like an hour into this and it's just like I just kind of thought like maybe just attack it from a different angle. Plus already there were a few people doing the like, let's just trudge back another commit. Okay, this one's still broken. Trudge back another one. Go back way back. Okay, it worked way back then. And then, trying to do like a binary search to find the one in the middle where it still works. I kind of was just like, well, let's see what happens if we just try again when it fails to connect. We'll just like put it in a loop where it just tries to connect a second time. And then it worked. So and maybe a delay would have fixed it too. I think we might have tried a delay and it didn't work, but because it needed to wait for the delegate to fail or something. But either way, it was some kind of unseen race condition that back when the project was lighter and maybe the main menu where you were doing that connecting didn't have as many assets or something, that we were able to connect, just that first time, and it worked the way it was kind of supposed to. And then as more assets got added to the project, that race condition, I'm guessing, became more apparent and actually started affecting things. So that's an example of just like what is causing this? Was it some change in this commit or that commit? It ended up just being like, all the files being added, slowing down the runtime, made it so that race condition all of a sudden became apparent. So it was a very like think outside the box kind of moment. So there's that. That was a fun one. The second thing I wanted to talk about, just getting out of the way, I guess, is blaming and getting blamed. Whenever there's problems, it's it's a little easier with our pipeline because we have all this like branches, testing. Something's broken from your build, it's like we kind of know, but even sometimes there's an ambiguity of like who added the thing or subtracted the thing that's making it, broken now. And it's important to, try not to blame people, even if, or at least if you're going to say like it might have been something you did, to just be like polite about it, which I think we're all very good at here. And then with getting blamed, I feel like I have this like hair trigger of when someone's blaming my work to get a little defensive, but I've definitely learned to curb that, where I just go, yeah, I mean, it totally could be my fault. I'll look into it, just have a just try to have a solid like Zen attitude. Oh God, my mouse is dying. Failure Friday. Uh, there we go. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about, which I can't actually find the post-process settings in the BP player character anymore. I don't know if Evan's here, but no, he's not. He's probably the
Are you
one that
talking about
like
the one that's on the camera? The one that's inherent?
yeah, the one that when I first came on board and it was like our dedicated servers crash all the time, and ended up being that we were just trying to replicate post-process settings. The last thing I did to figure that problem out was I just looked through all the variables inside BP player character because I knew that was the blueprint that was causing the crash. And just
Try
like just going down the list. and trying to see which ones were replicated that maybe didn't make sense. There was a replicated class reference. I pointed that out to Evan. He's like, "Oh yeah, that's weird." And then it ended up being the replicated post-process settings, which is in hindsight extremely obvious that like that's a problem. The post-process settings is an enormous struct. And just, the thing that made that difficult, when we built a Windows server, it worked fine. Everything, it didn't crash and it worked fine. And so the fact that it just didn't work on Linux, I had to think like, is it this cross compile tool that I know nothing about that's just doing it wrong somehow? There's no one else on the internet that seems to have problems with I forget what the resource is called that we use to cross compile. But yeah, that or maybe something to do with my virtual machine, my Linux server like isn't set up correctly. So because it was a Linux specific thing, which I think Baron mentioned in hindsight that it's like Linux just kind of has more of a stiff understanding of the code and the binaries and stuff, where Windows kind of will let things slide. Sometimes Linux is like, nah, this doesn't make sense, crash. If Baron, if you're in here, you want to speak to that, go ahead.
No, yeah, I mean you nailed that on the head. That Linux is just a little bit like, yeah, things can silently fail in Windows. Ensures in Linux usually crash, like just like the animation issue, right? Um,
Right.
yeah, that's not a problem in Windows. We get that's in the error logs everywhere, but when it happens on the DEDI, it crashes it. So
Awesome. Yeah. So basically, that ended up not even, yeah, that ended up being the reason is that it was like something that should have just been failing kind of all along. In hindsight, I would have maybe just looked at the variables first as soon as I discovered that that was the blueprint. But I had also just come on board, and every blueprint, especially the BP player character, is extremely daunting to look at. It's just there's so much in there. So I was just trying to attack it from multiple angles. Took a while, but ended up learning a lot about virtual machines and Linux servers. And, I think one of the solutions that I tried was just trying to build it in Docker so I didn't have to use a virtual machine at all. So I got my foot in the door with that too, I guess. The next thing, I don't know if you're in here, James. He is, but basically like yesterday or 2 days ago, we had like just that kill zone problem. I feel like immediately if I had like just had the foresight, to just be like, is this the proper kill zone that we're using? It ended up just being like, yeah, you just need to use the BP kill zone that we made that actually does damage to the player and kills it. He just had like a unreal kill zone that kind of just destroys actors that touch it. But yeah, we spent like a half hour looking through all sorts of different things of like what happens when we hit this kill zone. Does it do this? Does it do that? And it's just like it's always in hindsight that it's 2020, but I think it's another example of like attacking things from multiple angles, not getting stuck on um, brute force methods to try to solve bugs. Sometimes it helps to go through the commits and I solve a lot of problems doing that, but sometimes it helps to just be like, what else can we try that will only take a few minutes? And anything that you can think of, even if it seems unlikely, if it's only going to take a few minutes, it's worth trying. The things that are going to take an hour or two, like having to rebuild the engine or something, could be a temp files issue, which there's plenty of issues I've had throughout the years where it's like the intermediate files are screwing over the project somehow. And the only thing that's going to fix it is just nuking the temp files. And, it's going to take a while to rebuild. Oh, GM Logic has the settings for, yeah. So, the issue that I was just working on, which was plaguing me and giving me a headache, is I can actually look this up. Lawrence. This stuff right here wasn't working. No matter what I set this number to, it still wasn't working. And I was pulling my hair out. But then after tons of time, I realized that in my Throwdown Showdown branch, like a month and a half ago, I had put those game mode details on this other class and I was feeding them in. And it really sucks that I didn't think to like just look for where it was being used. I was kind of doing that brute force method and ended up just remembering like, oh my God, I instilled this change and then I didn't document it properly and I had no I'm going back to like ancient times almost on the Throwdown Showdown. And yeah, it ended up being I was overriding these settings. So it's just what a headache. And once again, just being able to like attack something from multiple angles is was ended up being kind of like I feel like debugging a lot of times. I don't know if who watches The Last Airbender. I've been, back into it because the Netflix series, but it's like, be an airbender when you're debugging because that's that's always what seems to help me is just like attacking things from multiple angles, whatever seems like what I can try right now that's only gonna take a few minutes. And yeah, I guess that's it. That's the moral of the story. Be an airbender. Attack problems from multiple angles. Assess which approaches will take the longest and do the quickest tests first. Or if something just makes the most sense, if you can art, you've already identified it basically at that point, then cool. I guess that's the end. That didn't take very long. Wish I had some
Nice.
visual aids.
There was
If
some.
anyone,
That was great.
if anyone
Appreciate it.
else wants to comment, pass it around, pass the mic. Whoever's got a problem that they solved, sort of sits along the same lines. Go
I
for
just
it.
want I just wanted to say good job, dude. This was very informative.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, good
Likewise.
job, man. I'll say
Yeah, I
that it was
appreciate
fun
what you
to.
said about. Oh,
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead,
oh,
James.
thanks. I was just going to say that it was fun to dive into the blueprints with you. As someone who never gets to do that, actually seeing some of the back end stuff was awesome. So thanks for doing that with me.
Yeah, right on. Anytime too. That's funny. Yeah, when I was helping James out, like it was taking forever for my version of the project to build. So I just was like, all right, I'll just walk you through it. And so
Yeah,
James got a little
I
debugging
got to do
lesson.
some coding, and I was like, "Oh, this is cool."
Pancakes.
Yeah, you're telling me what to do, but this is still fun.
Yeah, throwing a word in your print strings just in the beginning. Like obviously we all see Batman says throughout the project. Just something like that, a little
Yeah.
breadcrumb so you don't have to look through thousands of logs. You can just be like, I think James, we just type pancakes at the beginning of the append, which no one's gonna know what that means looking back, but hopefully we'll just delete those.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, that was good. And also just appreciate your thoughts on blame. I mean, it's a big thing, and it happens, and it's never really constructive to blame someone for something, but it happens, all the time. And when you do get blamed for something, to just take on the responsibility of fixing it, and to do that maturely is, that people that do that gain a lot of respect from me, and that is the right way to handle it. So
The art of politely blaming and being polite when getting blamed is something I feel like almost everybody is just you need to hone throughout your life, in any situation. At the last job theory, there was a time where I was just being blamed, and it ended up being uh, the art pipeline person did something, to their own thing. And of course, after like a half hour of working through it with me and then being like, I'm pretty sure it was you and you did something. And then she looks at some nodes and goes, oh, that's right. I unplugged this. Sorry, Brian. Like, all right, it's okay. But the whole time I'm just being cool, just taking it, just like, yeah, sure. I mean, it definitely could have been something I did, I suppose. I'm not really sure what it would have been, but just being cool in the situation of blaming and getting blamed is a art form.
yeah, yeah, like you said, Zen, good way to be in all aspects of life, actually.
I guess the summary, I just had this like it's like lots of fails, but no bails, you know.
Perfect. Great way to end the
Yeah,
meeting.
that's it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks again, Brian.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.